People who left their partner on the day of the wedding, what happened? I was a guest, but for context, this took place in a very religious and conservative community. 3 days before the wedding, we got a call that it had been called off because the groom was caught cheating. He had gotten someone else pregnant, which was shocking on its own. As the weeks passed, we learned the bride was already pregnant too and had planned to time the wedding, so it aligned with the baby. It was a terrible situation on its own, but when you factor in the atrocious religious shame and guilt, it made everything much worse. It affected the bride deeply, even 10 years later. Story 2. Boy, do I have a story. My good friend had a wedding. She and her boyfriend had been together for about 9 years. But their relationship was mostly a matter of convenience. They didn't really have anything in common. The day of the wedding, she was panicking, saying how she didn't want to go through with this. Everyone told her it was just being nervous for the big day. So they had the wedding. Everything seemed normal. But pretty much the day after, she realized she did not want to be with him anymore. So they never mailed their marriage documentation and figured they never got married. A couple of months later, he moves out, they part ways. A year or so goes by. The boyfriend gets a new girlfriend, and they want to get married. My friend then gets a text from him saying, hey, so it turns out someone else, the marriage officiant maybe, mailed their documentation, and they are in fact married. This happened in 2019, and just last month she is now technically divorced from him, which is hilarious because she's been dating someone for 2 years now and is pregnant with his kid. So I always joke about her getting knocked up by someone who isn't her, legally, husband. Story 3. Unfortunately, the one I know of was the day after the wedding. Huge, beautiful wedding, 250 plus guests, mid-20s college sweethearts. Parents were in the same social circle in their southern town. They were religious, so a big deal was made that they waited. On their honeymoon flight the next day, the groom turned to the bride, my older cousin, and said, "This was a mistake." Then completely shut down and didn't talk to her. They landed in Tahiti. She flew back on the next flight home, and the story goes he stayed in their honeymoon suite and banged a bunch of different women. I did not verify this personally, you know how family rumors go around. Then, a month later, he came crawling back, but she was too humiliated. Had spent the last month returning wedding gifts and writing thank you notes and dealing with the fallout while he partied. He wasn't ready, felt pressured, that sort of thing. They got an annulment, and now apparently, it's super awkward at alumni events, lol. She's now married with 3 beautiful kids, so I guess he made room for the right person in her life. You never know what goes on behind closed doors. What looks perfect from the outside can be totally different for the people in the relationship. Story 4. We called it the non-wedding. It was a very small backyard dog, and when we showed up, a relative of the groom ushered us out and whispered that the wedding was off, but they had all this food and helped us. Apparently just that morning, the groom found out that the bride banged the dancer at her bachelorette party, but his family said they'd already spent all the money on the party, so they'd just tell people when they arrived. It was one of the most awkward experiences of my life, because the groom just sat dejectedly in a chair while people tried to cheer him up. We ate a little out of obligation and then got the hell out of there. Poor dude. I honestly don't understand why people still bring dancers to bachelor/bachelorette parties. It always feels kind of pointless to me. In a lot of cases, both people in the relationship are out doing the same thing, while also worrying about whether the other is cheating. And the whole last night of freedom idea doesn't really make sense either. Your single life already ended the moment you became exclusive with your partner. You don't need a party to symbolically say goodbye to it. If you feel like you do need that kind of send-off, then maybe you're not actually ready to get married in the first place. Story 5. A colleague of my husband's texted him about a week before the wedding saying something cryptic like, "If I'm in Key West on Friday, the wedding isn't happening," so he was clearly having thoughts prior to. But social media showed that the rehearsal dinner happened the night before the wedding and he was there, so we figured he had gotten over it. We had family in town and weren't planning to attend the wedding anyway, but my husband texted a congratulatory message later the day off. Guy replied from Key West. He did not show for the ceremony. His excuse was that she wouldn't sign the prenup. The reality was that he was already seeing someone else. That's diabolical. Honestly, I don't think the prenup was the real reason the wedding didn't go through. The prenup was probably just part of the situation. The real issue seems like it was the other person they were seeing. And, if anything, that prenup probably would have ended up screwing the bride over in the long run anyway. Story 6. I don't know if this counts, but 6 years ago in March, my fiancé and I decided to postpone our wedding. The weekend the wedding would have been, he left me home alone to go spend the weekend with his parents. We lived an hour away from our parents, didn't have cell service or Wi-Fi, no landline. His parents posted all over FB that they were celebrating him not getting married to me and were celebrating his new girlfriend. A friend of ours he constantly told me not to worry about. My mom screenshot all of the Facebook posts, drove an hour out to where I was and said, "Hey sister, what are we going to do here?" I took a hot shower and cried. Then we packed all my stuff up and left a letter to him on the dining room table with the ring. Later he texted me asking, "Is this what you really want?" I replied saying, "Nope, but it's what I need." Story 7. Not me, but my best friend. I was set to be his best man at his wedding. While I was organizing his bachelor party, I reached out to some of our old friends to invite them. One of them who showed up we hadn't really seen in like 10 years, and asked who he was getting married to, and I told him. And he was just silent for a minute and said, "Bro, I literally just hooked up with her a couple weeks ago." I thought it was a joke, but he sent me a pic. Hardest conversation I have ever had to have. And it was only like 12 hours until the wedding. Story 8. My sister's wedding. It happened 2 weeks before the wedding. During his bachelor party, she flew to a different state to get closure from an ex. The groom wasn't much better, though. He disappeared during the bachelor party and was found out to be trying to hook up with girls and do drugs as one last hurrah before getting married. My boyfriend at the time was part of the bachelor party, and he told me when they went back to the hotel room to look for the groom, they found evidence of a hooker and drugs. The groom was skipping everywhere and getting turned down left and right, so I guess he figured he's got to get what he can LOL. After everything was found out, my mom tried convincing my sister to still do the wedding and just get couples counseling. Obviously, that didn't go well. My dad figured he paid for the venue and caterer, so we still had a party at the venue. We just didn't invite my sister. My boyfriend, who is now my husband, calls it the non-wedding when referencing it, LOL, so fun. They dated for 4 years and were engaged for 2 to 6 years total. Less than a year later, he married a girl who he was cheating on my sister with. During the entire time they were engaged, gave the girl the same engagement ring my sister wore for 2 years, LOL. Tacky, in my opinion. My sister ended up marrying the ex she flew to a different state for. Story 9, I should have left, but didn't. He chose to not spend our wedding night with me, as he cared more about doing drugs with his friends and staying out until 5 a.m. I was 2 years sober at the time, so I went to bed sober and alone, not even knowing where my now husband was. I thought in the moment he just wanted to be social with people he hadn't seen in a while, but a couple of years later. And I've learned I was just never a priority to him. Divorce is hopefully being finalized soon. Story 10. A friend and coworker. His family is from Europe and owns several estates. She is from Kentucky. Their families flew in from around the world to an island estate for a week of celebrations. They were married by the family's priest in the family's church, followed by a large reception. His family must have spent $1 million. At the end of the reception, they flew to Spain for the first stop of their honeymoon. The next morning, he went out onto the balcony and whistled to the flower seller in the plaza to bring flowers up. He shouted the room number and then jumped in the shower. She, not understanding, went out and saw 3 women walking across the plaza. She thought he had whistled at them and given out his room number. She packed her bags, stormed out, and left him at the hotel. He came out of the shower to find her gone and the flower seller asking for payment. He paid him and assumed she had gone to the front desk. About 30 minutes later, he realized his phone was missing and so was her luggage. He called his brother to call his phone and then to call her. She ignored the calls. He eventually reached her mother, who cursed him out for whistling at the women. He tried to explain, but she called him a cheater. He never saw her again. There was no divorce because the marriage certificate was never filed. She kept the rings, including his grandmother's diamond. She posted wedding photos on social media, but when he returned to the United States, she had moved out of their shared place. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. They were married for less than 18 hours. They spent 2 years in lawsuits over the wedding and engagement rings. This is honestly one of the dumbest stories I've read in this thread. She thought he called those girls up to their room so he could cheat on her, while she was literally still in the room. It really sounds more like she was already looking for an excuse to leave, and this was just the one she went with. Or maybe it's the kind of story lawyers piece together after everything falls apart. Either way, I feel bad for him, but at the same time, it kind of feels like he dodged a bullet. Story 11. So this happened to a friend of mine. You know, the sort of friend where you really like the person but aren't that close. Basically, I was unable to make it to her wedding and just wanted to congratulate her afterwards. Long story short, her wedding party returned the night of her wedding because the groom's party, Red parents, were demanding more dowry. Both the bride and the groom were doctors. She and her family were glad they showed their true colors before the wedding. Dowry deaths are very common in our country. She is married now and has a cutie patootie daughter. Edit. Dowry deaths are basically many brides have been burned to death after their marriage. It mostly happens when the groom's side basically believes their son could command a better dowry, so they see it as an easy way to get rid of the bride and get their sons remarried. It was so common in India in the 80s that the government had to come up with a law that any married female dying of unnatural causes before completing 10 years of marriage will be investigated as dowry death. Many times brides are tortured to bring more money from their parents even after the marriage. Also, to add a bit of cultural context, even though dowry is a Hindu religion tradition, the above-stated friend is Muslim. Also, a Catholic friend's marriage got dissolved over dowry. Ours is a sad country, united by misogyny. Story 12. I almost did this. 2 days before the wedding, as my bridesmaids were flying into town, my fiancé left his wallet at home. I'd never snooped, but opened it up. The very first thing I saw was a bright yellow letter from his former wife. It was from when he was deployed. They had a kid together, but there was zero mention of the kid in the letter. Granted, I only skimmed it, but the gist of it was that she knew he loved getting letters, so she was so great for sending him one. I was upset that it was important enough for him to carry around every day. It would be a different story if it was in a drawer or a box. But to have in your wallet, on your person, all the time? It stung. Also, I would frequently write little notes about what he means to me and hides them places. So, her letter being in there and none of mine was also sucky. He's a pretty quiet person and had nothing to say when I asked him about it. I figured I could go along with the wedding weekend and then not mail in the certificate. He knocked his vows out of the park. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience at all. He even got down on one knee to my daughter and said vows to her and gave her custom-made earrings. The wedding weekend was an absolute blast, and he seemed happy to be marrying me. So I figured I could forgive him. It was a time in his life that I couldn't relate to, but we had a wonderful, blended family and could move forward. I mailed the certificate in. We will be married for 10 years this summer. There's been some bumps, mostly that first year, but I've been very happy the last 4.5 years and so glad that we are together. Story 13. We dated for 4 years. We're 2 weeks away from closing on a custom house together and a month from getting married. We'd been counseling the entire time we were together for his childhood trauma and intimacy issues, and I just finally realized in one of those sessions that this was never going to change. I thought I could hang, but he wouldn't get intimate with me, tell me I was beautiful, or invest in my life. I authored a book for a college course I wrote, and he didn't even know what it was about, though I wrote it while we were together, as just one example. Anyway, it was one of the 2 best decisions I've made in my 34-year life so far to walk away from him in the house. It cost me $23,000, and it was worth every penny. I walked away at the pretty last minute, and it was the best decision I've ever made. Story 14. In my country town, a guy I knew was to be best man at a wedding. On the wedding morning, Lyndon went out to the farm where the groom was working. The groom sat down and started eating his packed lunch. Lyndon said to him, "You haven't got time to be eating. We must get ready for the wedding." The guy said, "I'm not getting married. I never asked her to marry me. She arranged it all, told me the date and to get the suit ready." The woman turned up to the church and had her car keep driving around the streets while waiting for the groom to arrive. This was in the 80s, before mobile phones. I don't know how she found out he wasn't coming. Everyone in town knew about it before nightfall. Story 15. A friend of mine very much believes in signs from heaven. She went to church a week or so before the wedding to pray for a good, strong marriage. As she was praying, the church got darker because a cloud passed over the sun, so less light came through the windows. She saw it as a sign and called off the wedding and cut off the guy after telling him it was over. Everyone on her side was supportive of her choice but laughed at the reason. Within a year, it came out that he was hiding a gambling addiction and loads of debt. He forged her name on some fake loan contracts saying she owed him, and tried to collect from her family saying her debt is their debt after she would not give him the time of day. Story 16. Not the day off, but a couple of days after. 2 days after my wedding, when all the wedding guests went home, my partner went MIA. Couldn't locate him for a solid 24 hours. Come to find out, he did an all-night ayahuasca ceremony with his yoga instructor that he was also fuxing. He walked through the door after being missing all day and said, "I don't love you anymore." That same day, I also found boxes of her stuff in our garage. He was already planning on moving her into our house. Why he let me go through with the wedding, I'll never know. It was hard on me and my family, who flew out for the wedding. They got married a couple of months later. It had been going on for a while. They're divorced now, so there's that. Story 17. A friend's story that has always stuck with me. It happened in the early 70s. In LA, he gave a ride to two girls hitchhiking and struck up a friendship with them. He ended up dating one of them, and she moved in with him after a year. They planned a wedding, and his family came from Detroit. Everything was happening as planned. Both families and friends were seated. The procession was complete, and the wedding march started. The church doors didn't open. After a few awkward moments, the door opened, and only her father was standing there. He said, "Sorry, she has to use the bathroom. It'll be a minute." After some time, her mother went to check on her. She was nowhere to be found, but they did find her wedding dress at their apartment. He was devastated. He said he sat there on the altar, steps, waiting. When he learned about the dress, he and his best man went on the honeymoon and stayed drunk the entire time. By the time he returned, all her things were gone. No note, no communication, nothing. She had completely disappeared. 18 months later, she showed up at his doorstep, crying, apologizing, and asking him to marry her. He said, "Closing that door in her face without saying a word was a great moment in my life." By then, he didn't care and had moved on. He was a great guy and lived a full life with quite a few massive twists, like being left at the altar. He was a Navy SEAL and once woke up in a body bag in Vietnam because they thought he was dead. After recovering, he returned home and was driving to his first day at a job after service at a stonework place where he would polish marble. In the parking lot, he couldn't get out of the car. He went back home and his mom told him a friend had just called. His friend's band had signed with Motown and they wanted him to join them in LA. He became a backup and harmony singer for Rare Earth, a 70s band known for Get Ready and I Just Want to Celebrate, and the first white rock band signed with Motown. He was a good friend. We had fun and did some business together. I still miss him. Now that's a satisfying ending we all want to hear. Closing that door must have been liberating on a whole other level. But I can't help being curious about what led her to come back after walking out on him 18 months ago. Story 18. Sort of related, my sister is bossy, boorish, and very domineering. She was going to marry a very quiet, somewhat docile military guy. His only request for the wedding was that she have her tramp stamp with her ex-boyfriend's name removed before the wedding. She was clearly playing a game of chicken with him by putting it off again and again. I was sure she would just ignore his wishes. But then I learned he had already left his previous fiancée at the altar. My sister knew this. At a family dinner the night before the wedding, he said, "Well, you only have about 16 hours left to get that tattoo removed," and then changed the subject. Not going to lie, it was interesting to see her walking down the aisle with all that lace brushing against her freshly lasered backside. Story 19. Not quite at the altar, but close. Over 50 years ago, my mother-in-law was engaged to a wealthy man from an influential family. They were both religious and made the joint decision to wait for marriage. The wedding took place in a massive church in front of hundreds of people, after which they immediately flew to Europe for their honeymoon. It was only after they reached the hotel and were alone together that he told her, "I can't do this. I thought I could, but I'm not in love with you. I'm not attracted to you. I'm gay." She took a cab to the airport that same night and waited until a flight home was available. She showed up at her parents' house unexpectedly, told them she was getting an annulment, and refused to say another word about the situation for the rest of the summer. Eventually, the story came out, but she was devastated. About a year later, she met the love of her life, the best man I have ever known, apart from my husband. at the pediatric hospital where she worked. Story 20. Not at my wedding, but my mom was the florist. The bride was kind of an idiot, but her deposit check cleared, so whatever. I was dispatched to deliver the flowers to the groom's side of the wedding party while Mom delivered the bouquets. I got to the venue where they were getting ready, and it was just the best man, drinking beer in jeans and a t-shirt. He told me the wedding wasn't happening. Oh no, is everyone okay? I've seen weddings canceled last minute because the father of the bride dropped dead, or grandma had a stroke or something. She already has a husband. I left it at that, told him that he could do whatever he wanted with the flowers, but that I had to hold up our end of the contract. When I got back to the shop, my mom, who had the fun job of delivering to the bride's side, filled me with the gossip from her cousin who was fielding questions at that end. She'd gotten married in a courthouse right after high school, but decided that since it wasn't in a church and they didn't move in together right after, it didn't count. Story 21. My husband's mom was left at the altar 3 times by the man he thought was his father. The second time it happened, she went to her ex-husband for a night, then went back to the man who left her at the altar and decided to give him a second chance. When my husband was born, she didn't tell anyone that his father could be someone else. Guess what we found out from DNA testing 30 years later? Anyway, back to the main question. The third time she was left at the altar, she broke up with him, and he kicked her and the kids out of the house he had bought from her dad, the one that her dad had built with his own hands. My husband, his sister, and their mom were very poor for a few years, but my mother-in-law always made sure they had enough to eat, even if she went hungry. My husband didn't see his dad very often after that, and he was shocked that we invited him to our wedding. They talk on the phone once a year or so now. He's a free spirit who can't be tied down to people, and he truly seems like someone who can't empathize with people. He cut off his whole family, and when we visited him for the first time, he left for over 9 hours to go on a mountain bike ride the first day we got there, and was very impatient with our young son. So my husband was glad that this wasn't his biological father in the end. Now my mother-in-law has the best husband for her, a very sweet guy who is over the moon in love with her. Thank God she was left at the altar by the man who threw away the boy he thought was his own flesh and blood and continued to break my mother-in-law's heart until she, finally, had the strength to leave him. I'm convinced people who leave someone at the altar have no heart or consideration, as that is truly the most dramatic and embarrassing and heartbreaking, not to mention expensive way of breaking someone's heart, declaring in front of all their friends and relatives that you don't think they are good enough after all. There are so many opportunities before the wedding itself to call it off. There is no reason to jerk around someone like that. Story 22. I seriously tried. I should have tried harder. This was with my first. She yelled at me the whole night before the wedding. A C went out in our apartment, and we had 2 floor fans stacked on top of each other. And she lost her cool, how punny, and kicked the fans over at me while throwing a tantrum. Neighbors called the cops, but the cops only checked her for bruises and didn't even hear my side of the story. When the cops left, she said, "If I wanted you in jail, all I had to say was, 'You hit me.'" So I slept on the couch that night, no fans either. She took both. Next morning, she left without me to get ready for wedding. I woke up and said, "F this," and went back to sleep. My family later called. I screened their first 50 calls. When I answered, they were screaming at me. I told them I'm not getting married. I should have left home because sure enough, they showed up, and it turned into a thing. They downplayed the red flags from before. Wedding happened. I look miserable in the photos. She looks like the devil got his crown. That began 7 long years of the same abuse from her. Physical, mental abuse, etc. More incidents with the cops. I'm not perfect. Back then I was a lazy young adult. But really, she never motivated me or supported me. It was put down after putting it down. Later, when my family heard of the abuse, they were like, "Well, why did you marry her?" Yeah. Edit. We obviously divorced. We both found new people and remarried. I feel bad for that poor guy she married. I found a great woman who really motivated me. I have kids now, my own house, cars, boat, land in East Oklahoma, etc. Who you're with can really drag you down or build you up. So don't waste your life with a bad person. Oof, the whole, "Well, why did you marry them then?" argument. It's wild how some people instantly shift the blame onto the person who got hurt. like that somehow cancels out what happened later. As if people can't change, masks don't slip, and relationships can't turn toxic over time. Honestly, it's such a crappy and dismissive thing to say to someone who's already been through it. Story 23. My best friend, female, married an airplane pilot. The next morning, they left for their honeymoon in Southeast Asia. When they landed in Singapore, she had an email from a woman in Colombia that was engaged to the same guy. He frequently flew to Colombia, so it made sense. The email had a lot of pictures to show as evidence. Apparently, the other woman found out because she saw the wedding pictures on social media. It was devastating. She had to disembark and pick up her luggage while crying and fighting with her husband. She called her parents, and they booked her a different hotel and a flight back for the next day. To make things worse, she found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later. So now she must deal with this a-hole for the rest of her life. Terrible situation all around. He is beyond lovely. She did not deserve what happened to her. I sometimes think about how someone's life can so easily be ruined by just picking the wrong partner, even when there are no clear red flags. Story 24. My brother backed out the day before. So many red flags. He was in the military at the time, and I rarely got to see him. He and I have always been super close. So when we would get to see each other, it was like two best friends reuniting after a year apart. That trip for their wedding was the first time I met the bride-to-be. She became weirdly jealous of me, was upset he wanted to hang out with and have me tag along on their random errands leading up to the wedding in the days before. I think that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It broke off in the middle of the night before. A bunch of families had traveled out of state to be there. We ended up just doing local tourist things and had a good time. I don't think he has any regrets. Story 25. I thought I had everything figured out. The career, the city, the woman I loved. But when it came time to marry her, I panicked. I hurt her deeply, something I'll always regret. But love doesn't let go that easily, and neither do I. I fought to earn her trust back. And when she finally took me back, we did it right. Quietly, honestly, just the two of us. Those years we had together were everything. I found peace in the ordinary. Cooking with her, sharing music, and riding that damn Peloton. I didn't know the last ride would be the last. But if I had to go, I'm glad it was still with her. In our home, in love. Story 26. Unless one of the two people getting married is discovered cheating or something like that on the day off, there's absolutely no reason to bring down someone's world like that. There is no need. Heart will hurt, but the humiliation and money part suck equally. F that. My wife was 10 minutes late walking down the aisle. I was like, what the hell, and was starting to sweat. It turned out she asked a friend to let her know when she should come out of the room she was waiting in. Her idiot friend forgot and went to sit down. Someone else went and got her, and we got married. The thought she wasn't going to show did cross my mind for a second. Thankfully, all is well 9 years later. Story 27. A second cousin of mine, British, was a very quiet, nerdy kind of guy who wasn't very confident. He got a scholarship and went to a college in the US where he met the woman who would go on to become his wife. She was the only woman I know of he'd ever had a romantic relationship with. Her family was very religious, and her dad was some sort of pastor, so they got engaged and married quickly. On the wedding night, she admitted to him that she was a lesbian and that she was in love with her maid of honor, and asked if he'd be her cover. What's the equivalent of a beard for women? Because her family would disown her if they found out. She wanted a loveless show marriage, but he thought they were in genuine love and were blindsided. He annulled the wedding, and her family apparently disowned her. It was all spoken about in very hushed tones, with my mum and aunties being all very British and polite about it. As an edgy teenager at the time, I found it quite funny, but looking back, he must have been devastated. Story 28. I remember when I was a kid, I had an aunt who had been dating a guy for a few years, planned her wedding, huge thing all around. He was all right. I remember them taking me out to play with family a few times, and he was nice. I don't exactly remember the details because I've been finding out new details as I've become an adult and understand more of the story when my family talks about it, but I remember having a suit ready to go, doing the rehearsal, going to the church and all, so this must have happened just a few days before the actual wedding day, if not the day before. My aunt decided to call off the wedding because I think she had never met the guy's mother, and up to the week before the big day, she had not been able to meet her. I think because the mother-in-law wasn't fond of her and tried really hard to avoid her, despite never meeting her before. I think it was one of those cases of the psychotic mother who thinks no one is good enough for her son and will make the girl's life a living hell. So her way of doing that was making my aunt feel dismissed and not worth her time. The wedding didn't happen, and they lost basically all the money from the hotel and party, and the food couldn't be canceled anymore. So I vividly remember having tons of food delivered to my aunt's home and my family splitting the huge pans into containers so we could all take home. I also remember having flowers everywhere for a few weeks because all my family had to split that as well, lol. They ended up getting married later, must have been a few months maybe. No idea what happened with the mother-in-law, but I think they made peace, albeit without a huge wedding as previously planned, at my aunt's home. They're still married, have a kid that's like 16, have a home, pets, and live happily. Last time I heard of any issues was like 12 years ago, I'd guess normal marriage issues. Story 29. Not the day of the wedding, but soon after. A couple bought a house that needed some work. The bride, a teacher, spent her time off working on the house. One day, the realtor came by looking for the husband. Turns out the husband had never signed the papers. On the day of closing, he had a big meeting, and he would come by later to sign. The realtor had been trying to track him down. It had been a couple of weeks. Bride and groom talked. He didn't want to be married. She kept the house in her name only. Annulment. She met a better guy and married him. Yes, it's weird for a person to get possession without both signatures, but it happened. Story 30. I don't have a story, but thought I'd insert that Miss Manners has said that while the only acceptable excuse for missing, at the last minute, a seated dinner party for 8 at which you were to be the guest of honor, is a death in the family, preferably your own. The only excuse needed for missing one's own wedding is, I didn't feel like it. She goes on to say that people might miss a good party, but they'll be spared the stories of the divorce. Story 31. This story is only technically fitting your story, and it didn't happen to me. It happened to someone I met in college, and it's extremely sad. Basically, the couple were one of those couples that were pretty much always together. They were childhood friends that started dating each other in middle school and stayed together through all high school. Shortly after graduation, though, she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the prognosis was only another month or two of life. He proposed to her rather quickly, and they held a small ceremony in the hospital. She literally left him that very day. They were not married for a full 8 hours before she passed. I met him at freshman orientation, and it had only been about a month since this had happened. He didn't tell me about it until a few weeks later, but it explained both why he was so depressed and why he was so uninterested in girls at the time. Some of the details I got from another guy who had gone to the same high school as them. He ended up dropping out in the first semester. The guy was just emotionally wrecked. Story 32. Not our wedding, but it fits. She wanted me to go with her to a coworker's wedding with literally an hour's notice. Now, I knew the wedding was coming up because she talked about this guy from work a lot, talked about his upcoming wedding, never indicated that she wanted to go or that she was invited. I had tickets to a college football game that day. She'd known I had those tickets and plans with my brother-in-law to go see that game for weeks. Morning of the wedding, she says she was invited to the wedding and insists I go with her. Of course, being a rational human being, I didn't go with her and told her I wouldn't be. The next hour was her screaming at me, threatening to leave me, calling me names. After about 30 minutes of this, I started throwing her things in a box and asked for the key to the house back. I told her I'd put the boxes of her things on the doorstep. She still left for the wedding. I packed 3 boxes of her stuff and put them on the porch before leaving for the game. Her sister came to pick up her stuff the next day and informed me that my now ex-girlfriend had broken up the nuptials during the speak now or forever hold your peace bit, confessing she loved the coworker. He married the girl in the white dress instead. I can honestly say that guy is smarter than me. He knew better than to stick your dong in crazy. Story 33. My ex bailed the day after our wedding. He blamed it on my being anxious during the wedding, which at the time I thought was cold feet, but now realize was a sign that it wasn't right because he and his family are jerks. But later admitted his parents had been against our interracial relationship from the start, and he never told me. He had a mental breakdown where he got into the shower with all his clothes on, and then went and sat in his parents' hotel room for many hours, then came into our hotel room with his parents and kicked me out. My parents had paid for the hotel room, lol. His mom tried to say that I was crazy and needed to be admitted to a mental hospital. I saw a psychiatrist in a panic the next day and she was like, no, you're fine. But that family sounds like they need some help. I still had to move to his city to start residency 4 days later. He called me apologizing on his way back up to his city and asked me to try again. Like an idiot, I agreed. And then after a couple months, he broke up with me again because he was upset that I pointed out that I had made major career sacrifices by choosing to go to the residency program in his city over other, better, and more well-regarded training programs. And he thought that his career should always come first, so I shouldn't have had any regret about choosing the program in his city despite what happened. We had never agreed to that. I think he took my saying I was open to moving to another city on our first date 4 years earlier to mean I would just follow him anywhere. Even though after that, we had had several discussions about how we both valued our careers and would both need to make sacrifices at different points in life. He also insisted we weren't legally married and accused my family of trying to convert him. Spoiler alert, I had to go to court to get an annulment. So he was wrong about that too. Oh God, what a loser. This is honestly pretty heartbreaking and infuriating at the same time. The way his family immediately tried to twist things and paint her as unstable instead of taking any responsibility is straight up manipulation. And him just running back into his parents' world right after bailing on her the next frigging day, while they backed him up, really says everything about him and his toxic family. I think she dodged a major bullet here. Story 34. This happened to me. She was 1 semester ahead of me and had graduated. 3 days prior, a psychopath at her work with a lot of generational money had spent a month grooming her cruelly. Hey, why are you getting married to this loser who had to join the military? My family has hundreds of millions. Well, he won. We had been together all through college. It was my last semester. I had the robes hanging in my closet when she just looked over and said, "We're done," packed her and moved in with Mr. Psychopath. He was a total arrogant jerk too. He would come to work and brag about taking home big women over the weekend because they were easy. Classy man, classy. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. You dodged a bullet. I had to call everyone on the guest list to say that it was canceled. Return whatever gifts people had sent. Most just cried when I told them and said, "Keep it, man." Only little bit of revenge was that they had to leave the state because there were a lot of pissed off people when they heard the news. I spent the next 2 weeks drinking myself to sleep. I didn't even think about dating for at least a year. It took about 5 years to learn to trust anyone again. Dating after that absolutely sucked because I still held deep distrust. I probably messed up some good possibilities. In the end, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I did multiple combat tours, new perspective in life, and am ending a wonderful third career soon. Met a truly wonderful lady who we have been together over 20 years now. Have a fully paid off house, 4 pensions that will fund us all comfortably for life. We take yearly cruises now to see the world. But at the time I was bitter. In the end, in my mind, all women, no matter what they say or do, will totally drop you like a toy the first time someone with a huge fat bank account and a true Ted Bundy personality walk in the door. I am still jaded for life over that one. Heck, just look at the Trump-Stormy scandal. It's all about the Benjamins, baby. No amount of love or soul or whatever can overcome that human desire for security and money combined with a socially adept groomer that's a psychopath. Yup, I learned a dark truth about humans. Painful, but true. I still have trust issues. But I look at my dedication wall with all the medals, photographs, memorials, and accomplishments, and am reminded that plan was not to be my path. I did so much better in the end. I helped thousands of people come home to their families that I probably would not have. Got to stand in places few humans can ever experience. See things you wouldn't believe. Somewhere in there is a hint there was a higher plan at work. I never spoke to her again after that and don't want to. I honestly don't even acknowledge her existence out of indifference. The person I had fallen in love with after 5 years died that day, and I just had to go through the mourning process. Story 35. It wasn't a day of the wedding, but I left my partner 3 months before our wedding. It felt like the day of. We had already sent invites and paid for the venue and most vendors. We had been together for 9 years and engaged for one. It wasn't any new information or a dramatic act. I now know I had been out of love with this person for years, but I was a community-less man-child, and it felt like our relationship train had already left the station. The closer we got to the wedding, the less I felt like I needed to hang on to this runaway train, and the more I felt like I needed to jump off before it crashed into a wall. We met when we were kids and grew into different people with different values. I was too scared to be honest about my feelings and perspective for years. The wedding gave me something bigger to fear, a life with someone I didn't love, and being an absent husband to a woman I cared deeply for. So I jumped off the train, and it hurt. The train still crashed into a wall, just less severely. But I did one small, courageous thing after years of being a coward. I still regret the years of cowardice and lies, but I take some comfort in the fact that I treated this person well and provided stability while other parts of their life developed. 4 years later, I've realized a lot of my fear and inability to love wasn't only tied to my partner, but also to my own issues. I've been seeing someone for 6 months who likes me for who I am, and I'm not performing in the relationship. So, outside of the dramatic stories, I think many last-day walkouts come from people who lost themselves in the relationship long before, and the wedding becomes a final performance they can't pull off. It's crappy and hard to forgive, but I don't think it always means someone is an objectively awful person. Story 36. Some old family friends. It wasn't the day of the wedding, but about 2 weeks prior to the party. My dad and the friend walked into the party where they didn't know anybody. They were just throwing a random party. The friend instantly fell in love with the bride-to-be, walked up to her and said, "Don't marry him, marry me." She agreed, walked out with him, and they got married 2 weeks later. They were together for 25 years until he died while they were dancing in Spain. Story 37. I called off my wedding 3 weeks before it was supposed to happen because I discovered my fiancé had been having an 8-month affair with a married woman. It came as a huge relief because I realized I never really wanted to marry him in the first place. I never really trusted him, and I was more in love with his family than with him. I always feel like I dodged a huge bullet. Funny thing is, I believe he's engaged again, and I have no doubt he'll cheat on her too if he hasn't already. Story 38. An ex went out to smoke a cigarette to take care of some pre-wedding nervousness. She got into her dad's car because she wanted to sit down and get out of the sun. She started the engine because she wanted air conditioning. She drove around the block a few times to air the cigarette smoke out of the car. The wedding was supposed to happen in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her dad told me that she kept driving until the car ran out of gas in Texas. I thought that was amazing when I heard about it. I like her. She's a firecracker. She told me that she got stuck in the birth/school/college/marriage/children/death plan and realized that she wanted to get the hell away from it. Story 39. Not on the day of the wedding, but 2 days before it was supposed to happen. I was in an extremely abusive and toxic relationship, and after a millionth anxiety-ridden sleepless night, I decided I had enough and called it off. I was physically sick. I had lost a bunch of weight, although I'm petite to begin with and developed a ton of stomach issues, and mentally exhausted. It did cost a lot of money in non-refundable deposits, and so much energy/courage to admit and explain it to our guests, but it was the best decision of my life. It felt like it. I thought that making that move would crush me and destroy me, but I felt nothing but relief and joy. Before things got sour between us, that man was my best friend for years, and I thought I'd never find a connection like this in the future. Boy, was I wrong, LOL. 4 days after calling off my wedding, I met the man who would end up being the love of my life and my husband. Story 40. My friend canceled his wedding about 2 months out. His fiancée at the time only had one friend, and that friend confessed to her, saying he was a much better match for her than my friend. She told my friend she didn't have feelings for the guy, but she wanted to remain friends. My friend told her he was not comfortable with that, and they broke up and ended an 8-year relationship. She's currently married to another man with the same exact name, and the guy looks like my friend. Story 41. It was at a friend's wedding. Her wife-to-be invited an ex-girlfriend to the event. They apparently professed their continued love for each other hours after the ceremony. Late that night, my friend caught his bride in a compromising position on the beach with the ex-girlfriend. They played nice in the morning, apparently drove home in silence, and we had a divorce party a few weeks later. In the process of clearing out her now ex-wife's belongings, my friend found diaries which included admissions she was only going through it because my friend was her sugar mama and didn't plan to stay together long term. Fortunately for the friend, he met someone worthy of his devotion a few years later, and they have a beautiful family. Story 42. A friend called it off a week before the wedding. He said he didn't like how controlling she had become and how much his life had changed over the 2-year courtship. Then he slept with her best friend from work, got her pregnant, and they had a wedding before the baby came. 12 years later, he was stuck in Vietnam for a week for work. He got drunk, hooked up with a Vietnamese S-worker, and was found out when his wife discovered the Facebook messages. The strange part is that she threatened to expose him if he divorced her. This was after he told her he hated her and that they had nothing in common. After a few therapy sessions, they acted like best friends. She blackmailed him into staying by saying that if he left or divorced her, she would tell their families about the adultery, including their child. They also work at the same company, so she said she would tell everyone there too. Nothing says love and marriage like being forced to stay through blackmail. Story 43. A friend from school canceled the wedding the day of because it turned out the groom pretty much banged every person, male or female, he could. They later went on to marry after a cooling-off period. We've been married for about 6 months. He finds out she has been banging on his brother. They divorced. Then they got married again after about a year being divorced. They had 5 children in a couple of years. Then they got divorced again because they both were cheating on each other with multiple people. And now they are dating/living together again. Story 44. Not me, but good story on the way into the marriage. Husband's best friend and his wife, male 45 and female 28, got married, seemed happy, cutesy, adored each other, and constantly told people, as well as posting on SM, just how incredibly happy they were together. Fast forward a year later, they are getting divorced. She claims he is a narcissist. He's a little cocky and arrogant, but would not be diagnosed as a narcissist, and verbally abusive. He wasn't in previous relationships, but people can change. Turns out she has been sleeping with a bunch of his friends. We're talking like a dozen. The night of their wedding, she just wanted to party with everyone post-reception. He just wanted to spend time with her. 3 months into the marriage, their house suspiciously burns down. She didn't exactly like it, wanted a bigger home and newer. He had been updating it for 2 months. The friends are from another friend group, so we're not exactly familiar with them. Just know some by name. Following the wedding, she would get physically abusive towards him. She eventually sees a psychiatrist and is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He stays with her. She wants to go out nightly to the bars. He stays home. She would go home with a different guy almost weekly. He discovered this by tracking her on Snapchat. They ended up going through with the divorce. It comes about 2 to 3 months after signing the final divorce papers, and they are back together. The house is still not completely rebuilt, and they are staying in a mobile home on the property. No plans, but talk about marriage again. Story 45. Not me, but a friend of mine. He didn't leave the day of the wedding, but he should have. I was a groomsman of his during the wedding, which happened to be the first time any of us at his wedding party ever met his bride. He walked us into the venue and went, "Okay, these are my friends who will be in the wedding." And she didn't look up, didn't say hi, barely interacted with us all day during rehearsal and dinner, just instantly started barking at orders at him and demanding to look in his phone every so often. Immediately got the ick from her, but decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Could just be a bridezilla moment. We met the rest of the party, her bridesmaids and maid of honor. We all kicked it off and were friendly and chatty. Day of the wedding? They wouldn't speak to us and gave us the cold shoulder all day. Whole vibe is off all day during the ceremony and reception. Whatever, I didn't think much of it at the time, but it was weird for sure. Fast forward 2 years, I found out she's been making him sleep on the floor the entire marriage and verbally abusing him constantly. He started talking to us less over the 2 years because of her, and she controlled his entire life. He calls me one day crying and tells me about what's going on, and I made him stay at my house for the weekend, during which he decides to divorce her, with the support of her own dad who helped him move all his stuff out. It was messed up. He's doing better now. Story 46. My friend and the groom had a shared joint inbox for couples. One of his personal notices forwarded on by Incomplete Rules that morning. It was a debt collection agency which she called immediately, confused as she was unaware of any debt. Let's just say the debt was huge. After confronting him, she also found that he had previously had an insolvency agreement with creditors that he was still paying off. No issues like gambling, but he was a pushover with people asking for money and easy to take advantage of without paying him back. He would go into more debt himself to help someone out. People owed him more than they would spend on a house if they could ever afford one, and for years no one had paid back a penny. She knew nothing of this, so ended it and just left right after telling her parents some basic details, who then took over to look after everyone and the logistics of clearing everything up for that day. Story 47. My sister-in-law, she was given an updated prenup that basically said she couldn't have a career or go to school or have a social life. The lawyer told her to run and run fast. She canceled the wedding a few days prior. Stupid thing is, she got back together 2 years later and got married. I was not allowed to ask about the prenup situation, but it's been a couple years now and I haven't seen her since. They moved away and she's completely isolated. Story 48. My old coworker, the night before the wedding, she gets a random Facebook message from another woman in Texas, where the groom was finishing his residency, with pictures and details of them going on dates, weekend trips, making out in selfies, etc. At 4 a.m. in the morning, a text goes out to everyone at the wedding party so that the wedding is off, and divide and conquer the guest list with making people aware. Wedding obviously never happened the next day. Story 49. Obligatory. Not my wedding. And this is maybe a different definition of leaving, but wedding was nice, but then the groom disappeared early on from the reception. Bride did the rounds alone, looking dejected. Cut to a while later, and my partner and I needed to get something from our car. Came across the groom and his best man doing drugs in their car in blatant view of the house hosting the reception. It was the first wedding I had ever attended. My partner at the time had tried to warn me things might be a bit unorthodox. It just made me sad. In the end, the couple didn't last long, maybe a few months, but it sounds like both had a hard time with life. She had a kid from a previous relationship that he ended up getting custody of. I don't know how things played out after that, but I do hope things improve for all of them. Story 50. Had the father of the bride smoking in a car in the car park. No big deal, right? Well, we went looking for him, as she was a bridezilla that had to have everything perfect. Cambodian/Vietnamese weddings. It's not about you, it's about the image and status you present to your community. Well, it turns out when we found security daddy in the car park with his mates smoking heroin, and were not cool about it due to our laws, we had them arrested. And Sapol found commercial quality stuff, which had ruined the bride's perfect wedding. So, bride stormed off to go and deal with daddy and his mates getting booked. Tons had already been spent on cognac for each table, lobster and other Asian cooking delights. And the entire reception just carried on saving face. Everyone got wasted. Groom, you could tell, was having a rough day and decided to just get wasted. And it really showed me how a lot of weddings are all about people showing up to get a feed and get wasted. No one seemed to really be fazed by the wedding didn't happen after a feed and booze. Tried to force the groom to redo the wedding later from what we heard, but his family said they would disown him if he continued with her. He still loved her and told her they would make it work. She demanded a repeat of the day daddy included. He couldn't afford it. These types of weddings are like a house down payment, so you would think she would demand daddy pay. Instead, she called him cheap, and they broke up. He seemed like an okay guy. Last year, 5 years after, she was on the news for selling drugs in a nightclub in Adelaide and is now doing 5 to 7 years. Story 51. The cancellation wasn't day off, but 3 weeks before. The bride-to-be discovered texts or chats to a waitress the groom met a few weeks beforehand, indicating a hot romance, meetups, and the waitress, and professing love to the waitress. Groom was upset at being caught and at the wedding canceled. He wanted to go through with the wedding, and if the bride had fallen for his trap and said vows, he probably would have been texting love and intimate messages to the waitress during their honeymoon too. So many people try to live two lives, as if they can. They cannot. It always blows up, and the longer it goes on, the more damage done to everyone. If you see an ex who hates the other and tries to screw up child visitation at every opportunity to take every dime, it's usually that one discovers the other had a long-term affair with actions like shacking up with the mistress while wife is in the hospital for childbirth or surgery, or she was screwing around during husband's health crisis. Crazy, but sometimes it is the one who was caught who stirs all the trouble, angry at getting caught. Story 52. My cousin is not always the most mentally stable person. There were warning signs, most obvious of which was being several hours late to the rehearsal dinner. On the day of the planned wedding, she locked herself in the garage and refused to leave. My family held the reception anyway since it was already paid for, so I might as well eat the food. Cousin and her now husband tied the knot at the courthouse like a week later. They've been married for like 10 years now. Story 53. I found out that she was texting a lot with my cousin in Spain. She, obviously because she was far away, would not attend the wedding, but I guess she was remorseful of her conscience. I was on my way to church when I got a video. It was of her. She had recorded the screen of her phone and sent me every detail of the conversation she had. She sent photos and more as if they were a couple at a distance. I found out on our honeymoon in Europe about the plan to go and see her without me realizing it. Then I just started feeling bad, vomiting my dress in the car. Then I was taken home and never got to church. Story 54. A close friend, I've known him since I was 15 and my fiancé was his best man, got out of a long relationship and then started dating an older woman he met on a dating app. I still remember the night of their first date. He was a different, more mature version of himself around her. I believe he liked the older woman since he never really had a mom. After 6 months, they got engaged and then married 9 months later. On the day of the wedding, I was driving him and my fiancé around, and he asked if I could take him to the airport. I said yes, of course, but he never wanted to follow through. 6 months after the wedding, he's sleeping on our couch saying that it's not working. Turns out he spent the 2 weeks before the very expensive wedding living in a hotel because he didn't want to do it. Felt like he had no choice because they'd gotten this far. He went back to her, and they appear to be doing fine, as my fiancé says when I ask, but our friend can never appear to really be himself around her. I just hope he's happy and okay. Story 55. My coworker was getting ready for her wedding when she was notified that her fiancé was too drunk to walk down the aisle. My other friend said that family members walked down the aisle and told guests that the wedding was off. Groom was beyond drunk with the help of his groomsmen. Groom got some help. They took time apart. She took time off work because she needed to prioritize her mental health. They went to therapy, they rebuilt, and are now married with their third kid on the way. Story 56. Not on the day, but I got dumped 4 days before the wedding. I was in the camp of everyone has problems. Most of them have solutions and a path to work on them, but with some exception. My ex was more idealistic. We were each other's first, so I tried hard and never gave up. I should have given up long ago, but I didn't. So that was partly my fault. Planning and everything went on up until a week before. She just started bawling to the planner. The planner called a few people, and our officiant, our pastor at the time, suggested to me that we wait. But then she dumped me that same day. She's married, hopefully happy, with kids, and I've moved on. Story 57. Never got that far, but I lived together twice for over 3 years each time. The first girl was from a very wealthy family. At the time we started our relationship, she was attending 2 universities simultaneously, dreamed of being a very inspiring lady to be with. 2 years down the road, she had dropped out of the most prestigious of the 2 universities, and all she talked about was marrying and having 5 kids and working in her family multinational company. Her father called me one day and said we would be traveling together throughout the weekends over the next 2 months. I should be at 5 a.m. at the hangar, where their airplane was parked in the airport every Saturday. We traveled to all their industries and operations in my country. He displayed to me the extension of their empire and at the end gave me a plan of how I would do my own thing. He, with him, backed me up with a consistent monthly income as soon as I married his daughter. I loved those people like family, but I was only 25 at the time and felt I had so much to live before settling down. I explained that, and he felt very sad, I could see. I'd have loved to be his son-in-law, but the timing wasn't right. A month later, she and the brother moved to Australia to work at an office they had there. I met her a few times after that. We banged, but things never moved forward. The second time, the lady was much younger than me. I was in my late 20s. It was a crazy passion in the first 6 months, and we moved in together. Her family hated me for no reason, and after some time, I felt like she began to hate me as well. She was sketchy and more than once caught her texting with university classmates, and it was clear she was always on the watch for some better option, literally a social alpinist. When I confronted her, it was always these big tantrums. I was the bad guy who didn't give her enough attention, as if I didn't have a job for myself and manage my own business on the side, etc. 3 years together, and she started pressuring me to propose. She was very gorgeous, so she thought she deserved the heavens and earth, but there was no way I could see myself living through that nightmare for the years to come. I very openly let her know I was preparing to go abroad for a master's program. We kept living together, and I went above and beyond to keep things amicable since I could sense from her personality that she could easily set me up with false accusations and the like. I made a prenup where she wouldn't have any right to my estate and businesses, and she went mad on that. I said that was my condition, and that kept her at bay. Every time she started losing the handle of the situation, she would break up and call me in 2 weeks, saying we should talk and try to set the tone to come back together, but under her terms and control. It went on like that for the last year, and then one day I finally left. About a year later, she called me and said that her then-boyfriend suffered a car accident and died, and asked if she could come spend some time with me in the country I was living at the time. I asked around and found out their relationship played out with the same toxic dynamics of power struggle, and in one of those breakups, the guy got drunk driving and died in a car crash. After that, she got engaged to another guy who left her 2 weeks before the ceremony. I saw photos of this guy, and he was ugly. So I suspect she got someone she thought would have total control over, but who ended up not buying it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.